After the roaring success of our event in January, we welcome back Watts and Ruth Cain, but we thought we'd upgrade from Will Davies, and if he was on this panel, he might end up being on every single panel. So we have Josh Cohen joining us today. Josh Cohen is a professor of modern literary theory here at Goldsmiths and a psychoanalyst. He's author of several books, including The Private Life, Why We Remain in the Dark, and he has a new book out called Not Working, Why We Have to Stop. So if anyone saw the last panel, might be interested in that one. Watts is a consultant clinical psychologist, psychotherapist, writer and activist committed to social change. And Ruth Cain is a senior lecturer at Kent Law School and has been a service user for over a decade in London. So we welcome Watts and Ruth back, and Josh Cohen. So we're going to, the panellists are going to present, and then hopefully we'll have a long time for a really good discussion afterwards. A word of warning, it's a bit of a sensitive subject. Some of the speakers are going to talk about some sensitive things. So take care of each other, and obviously, you know, if anyone needs to leave, that's absolutely fine. So without further ado, I'm going to pass on to Dr. J. Watts.
It's you lot who deserve the clapping for getting here on such a hot day, and also when it's Pride and World Cup. So it's fantastic to see the energy for something that is close to all of our hearts. I've rather pathetically underlined after neoliberalism because it's so easy, and I guess this is really the theme of today, to get stuck in the awfulness of now. And it's wonderful that we've got this collective space to think, well, what afterwards? But I think the insistence of neoliberalism, the way that we've internalised it, is such that I certainly need to underline it to keep that focus on what next. So, in case you were too hot, I thought, you know, it's 30 degrees outside, how can I chill everyone down? You know, a Margaret Thatcher quote is a great way. And this is a especially chilling one, I think. This is from 1981. And this is kind of, you know, economics are the method, the object is to change the soul. And unfortunately, as I'll be arguing, and probably the other panellists, actually, yes, that's been quite effective, to deadly cost. I then wanted to go on to just looking at an advert. Now, this is an advert that's huge right now. Obviously, I know, you know, you're all too erudite to have watched Love Island last night, but had you been, you would have seen that this advert is on ITV the whole time, it's on Channel 4, it's really immersive, and it's a 1-minute advert where basically it kind of revolves around the, you know, the Who Are You game that you play where you're little, where one person has a sticker on their forehead and the other person has to ask them lots of questions. And this advert basically does that with kind of 8 or 10 different dyads, and there are some famous people, there's Jeremy Paxman, there's Professor Green, some so-called ordinary people, and the tags are different diagnostic categories, so anorexia, depression, schizophrenia, OCD, what have you. So we have this advert and the questions that are asked, and I kind of have a bit of an existential crisis over this advert, because it's conflating very much a kind of, you know, an identity question and a having question. But the kind of questions that are being asked of these people are, you know, very much focused around work, you know, will your boss find out, you know, much more those kind of concerns. And what we find out at the end of this award-winning advert is that it is funded by Lloyds, the big bank. And actually at least 20 seconds, which is quite a long time for a 1-minute advert, is devoted to, you know, the Lloyds motif that's been in adverts for decades of the black horse running. And we are told that Lloyds, an example of a big bank, of course, is by your side with mental health. And we're given a hashtag which the consumer, the watcher, is encouraged to circulate to just show everyone, really frankly, how brilliant Lloyd is, which is get the inside out. Now, for me, this says something about the relationship between neoliberalism and mental health, and how, in a way, the idea of mental illness right now is being used to prop up something which is demonstrably causing significant amount of breakdown and distress. We do something like, you know, the rates of self-harm, for example, have increased by 68% in 5 years.
all the statistics show a doubling of suicide rates since employment support allowance has been introduced for disability benefits. But this peculiar marriage, this, I think, very dodgy marriage between Big Bang, as an example, and mental illness type of discourse leads in this case to them having won for disability awareness £2 million of free advertising, as well as the capacity to present themselves as a caring community organisation. And it does lots of other things as well. It solidifies mental illness categories. Now, this is obviously part of a wider thing that we have right now, where there is this double bind, where people talking about mental suffering and pain is obviously at some level a good thing, but we also have this solidification and the presentation to the public of categories that actually, in a scientific, let alone ethical level, are very dodgy. For example, to distinguish depression and anxiety is near impossible. They don't have the kind of credibility as distinct categories. That's not saying the suffering is any less real, my God, no, but they don't have the kind of categories that the illness, it's just like breaking your leg type kind of current discourse has. And of course it decouples banks in this example from the causes of breakdown. So for example, if we think about the breakdown of the banking system in 2008 and how, and all you people who are economists will know this a lot better than me, how discursively in the public imagination the austerity measures that followed, even though people like the National Audit Office, etc., are saying they weren't the necessary way to go, they were the way to take away blame from big banks, from the effects of neoliberalism, and place them somewhere else, actually very, very often in people who are not taxpayered, people who are not working. And the government with mental illness discourse is doing something very, very similar. So if you look at voting patterns for the last election, we know that in the last 3 elections, mental illness as something that the government should be doing something about has got far and far higher up the list of why people vote for the parties that they do. But the Tories, and this will drive anyone who works for the NHS mildly apoplectic, the Tories actually are seen as people who are very mental illness positive and who are really part of this game-changing kind of environment we're supposedly in. So it's incredibly effective as an idea right now. Now, the hashtag of the advert, Get the Inside Out, actually it forecloses something incredibly important, which is the outside coming in, often, though not always, in admixture with the internal kind of persecutors people have from their childhood, are, again, evidence-based, very, very linked with why people break down, why people suffer, why people collapse, why people splinter, why people attempt to kill themselves and succeed in killing themselves. So instead, when we're thinking about, OK, this question of after neoliberalism, what kind of different questions might we be asking? Not, oh, do you have this particular diagnosis, can you get back to work quickly? But things like, are you unable to relax for a minute, physically or mentally, because the government have saddled you with an unpayable student debt and you must spend every waking moment working towards ways to pay that back? Is it impossible to get up in the morning because the government, if you're on benefits, has made you feel like a failure for not working and sends you, quite literally, positive mental attitude text alerts because that's going to help? Thirdly, are you starving or cutting yourself because it's the only bit of control left in a world where you've been performance measured since you were 6, where you're constantly supposed to be selling your brand on Instagram, where you're supposed to have this hairless body and be having brilliant sex, whilst also presenting yourself as woke? Are you agitated and angry? This is the last one. I had to stop myself here. Thank goodness the slide ended. Are you agitated and angry because your work has been reduced to carrying boxes in a large warehouse devoid of any human contact, often the case now, unsure if you'll get paid if you're sick next week, and with your performance measured with a compulsion to have a happy smile if you work in the consumer thing, and even your toilet breaks are measured. These questions seem far more telling and far more revealing about why we experience such devastating pain now more than ever. So, in terms of my, I will get back to the after, we have this kind of sort of situation right now. It may already be mentioned, but Zizek's famous quote, "It is easier to imagine the end of life on Earth than it is to imagine the end of capitalism." I mean, obviously we're going to sort that one out, today. But, the second thing is the idea of mental illness at this point in history as an explainer of distress, breakdown, meltdown, and also a shield, a protector. So neoliberalism, so frankly collapsing, so obviously mental illness is a binder, the idea of it right now, to make it seem that something progressive can still happen, so that we don't think, okay, well, what are the causes behind that we have to do something about? And links with that as well, the third thing, as I saw it, economic disadvantage. If you are impoverished materially, and even worse, if you are impoverished materially, and that is combined with not having any space to think, not having any space to feel, not having space to buy things to cheer things up, not having any space for a therapy that isn't about getting you back to work, and especially if you're on benefits, excuse me, but this is so important to me, if you're on benefits, also being told that if you are not working, worklessness equals worthlessness, it's very, very difficult to keep any space for all of us right now to imagine difference. And so this is a way to stop the masses, and we are the masses for God's sake, from mobilising. And so this is the question, how do we mobilise? How do we think when our responses are the classic evolutionary freeze, flop, fight, flee? How do we do that? And for me, my tentative thoughts around this are that there are three different types of tasks. The first is to deconstruct the ideologies that we have eaten in. So we have all, like it or not, eaten in neoliberal ideas. The amazing and sadly missed Mark Fisher talked very, very beautifully about not working for an institution and being really pleased about that at first, at one period, and then the relentlessness of how the fuck am I going to get the money, actually, how difficult it was actually to think, even though the fantasy was that that would be possible. And for me, I think it's really important that we link this with the kind of primitive anxieties and concerns that are being taken advantage of so much right now for neoliberalism to just desperately try and keep going. The idea that the other is out to suck dry all our resources. The idea that the other wishes to infiltrate through our walls and take over, obviously not thinking about a certain American president there. The idea that happiness is possible, we've got the amazing Will here who's done such brilliant work on that. The idea that independence is preferable, that interdependence is something bad, and everyone in mental health is just told constantly, improve, become independent of services, do that and you'll get something, but, if not, nothing. And also the idea that loss is avoidable. So this kind of sort of collective myth, this childish myth that tries to keep these ideas going. The second thing, in terms of just me kind of sort of playing with it, was to help groups tolerate one another and individuals feel supported. So one of the things that I think is so important, if you look at progressive movements, what people come up with and lose again and again is that combination of what Audre Lorde called radical self-care. So some things to look after the individual, because we are individually embodied, but also combined with consciousness raising so that people can work together to change the structural roots of a lot of distress. With that, I think we have to acknowledge hate, envy, ineptitude. I've been really, really lucky to work for a lot of years with different kind of progressive movements. And you have these brilliant ideas. We think of Occupy, we think of the feminist movements. They tend to collapse because either they have this dream of complete democracy where everyone's evil, that's an interesting slip, even, or there is, someone becomes a leader and then they get attacked and envy and all that kind of stuff. We have this again and again. That's one of the things, one of the currents that really stops the moving on into something more radical, into something more interdependent. And I also think with that, also, especially in the age of social media, we need some ways to, excuse my pretentiousness for a second, reanimate time. It's very, very difficult to learn right now, because if you fucked up, you can get reminded on it forever in social media and social space. And so why bother learning? Why bother changing? It's a frozenness. And I think that's something that we need to attend to try and think, what next? And very, very lastly, I think we have to offer something new that people can get behind, which allows for the fact that none of us acts rationally. Most of us on the left have our personal reasons for that attachment, that identification. And so we need to kind of really think, okay, how can we find ways to bear one another, to allow for our interdependence, and thus to share resources? So those are my initial thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks. This young woman who comes from an anarchist poster that I came across first in the mid-'80s in a memorabilia shop in Carnaby Street and had a very profound effect on me. Anyway, she hovers over the book that Lucy mentioned, which I've just finished. So just to put that in the very short adapted extract that I'm going to read from it. The book is an argument, really, for a reconception of. I'm really bad at doing this synoptic elevator pitch thing. Even once I've written it, especially once I've written it. It basically consists of a typology of the neoliberal condition, and a typology specifically of the inertial conditions. The reference is in part to Ivor Southwood's wonderful kind of memoir, ethnography, work of social theory, non-stop inertia, one of the best sort of brief introductions to the internal conditions of precarity that I know. But it takes us through a series of typologies which have a reference both to Walter Benjamin's typologies of modernity, but also to Freud's notion of libidinal types, different ways of loving, different erotic relations to the world. These are different inertial relations to the world, born out of the conditions of neoliberal experience. So the first type is the burnout, the second is the slob, the third is the daydreamer, and the one that I'm extracting from is the idea of the slacker, and it links to what Jay is saying about after neoliberalism, insofar as the slacker functions for me as a kind of cipher, a utopian cipher of a possible other way of relating to one's own body and to work. I'm going to start then from a quotation from the Romanian philosopher E.M. Cioran, who says, "Only the skeptics or idlers or aesthetes escape the contagion of fanaticism, because they propose nothing, because they, humanity's true benefactors, undermine fanaticism's purposes. I feel safer with a Pyrrho than with a St. Paul, for a jesting wisdom is gentler than an unbridled sanctity." So the slacker challenges the unquestioned privilege of action and purpose in our culture of relentless accumulation and competition. She confronts the fundamental question of what makes a life worth living. For example, in the name of what do we protest neoliberalism's creation and exacerbation of social division, economic inequality, inhumanity and chaos? We can respond to such evils with a raft of worthy progressive aims and policies, protecting the welfare safety net, redistributive taxation, living wages, UBI, so on. And such policies rightly seek to improve the conditions on which we live, but they also raise the question of what we might want to live for. Social policy propositions address the needs of the human being as a creature of action, as a product of particular affiliations and identities. The quiet virtue of what Choran calls proposing nothing is that it encourages us to think about and experience ourselves as irreducible to the sum of what we do and opine, as creatures who beyond any action or achievement simply are. From this perspective, the slacker's life of sloth and doubt is a protest not in the name of this or that cause, but for the very right to be, to exist in what the philosopher Frédéric Gros calls a suspense of freedom, outside the confines of personal, professional, or other identities. In the modern age, this right is under threat. The manic productivity of capitalism, the demands and aspirations of social status, and the mechanical rhythms of industrialism all corral the individual into a perpetual state of anxious and compliant activity. The so-called countercultures sprung into being at every stage of modern history as models of living forged in opposition to these alien rhythms. The romantics of the latter part of the 18th century, the aestheticists and decadents of the 19th, the beatniks and hippies and punks of the 20th all conceived new modes of social, creative and sexual life, encompassing what we might call idiorhythmic experiments in communal living. And I take the notion of idiorhythm from a late seminar by the great Roland Barthes, who wrote of the concept of idiorhythmy in his seminar, How to Live Together, as a condition in which each subject lives according to his own rhythm. Very simple. To live life in this way means to refuse the regimentation of your time and space by the impersonal forces of work and leisure, giving yourself over to the pace and style of the impulses, curiosities, and desires unique to you. But it's equally a social ideal, whereby the rhythms of all our individual lives coexist without encroaching on each other. So, idiorhythmic experiments in communal living, in opiate consumption, in artistic forms, in everyday fashion. The Romantics were the first in this long chain, protesting against the coercive demand to do and comply with industrial society and its regime of permanent productivity. In Romantic poetry and prose, such protest often takes the form of episodes of reverie in which the writer, transported by a sublime landscape into the depths of the self, floats free of the external world and its encumbrances. In such moments, the nervous agitations of reality dissolve, leaving him in a bubble of perfect, though necessarily transient, activity. And I'm going to just jump here to a quotation from Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Reveries of the Solitary Walker. And in particular, one of its most famous passages from the fifth of his solitary walks, which sees him taking refuge on the tiny Ile de Saint-Pierre, set in the middle of Switzerland's Lac de Bienne, which he retreated to after his house got stoned by a mob, by an angry mob, in the nearby village of Motier. The quiet and solitude, because he was an advocate of all kinds of immorality. The quiet and solitude of the island proved the ideal balm for his state of persecuted agitation. Dedicating himself to precious far niente, to doing nothing, he embraces a daily life of inactivity, idly gathering botanical specimens, sitting on the banks of the lake or drifting in a little boat into the middle of it. This mode of minimal activity introduces a perfect inner state. And this is what he said: but if there is a state where the soul can find a position solid enough to allow it to remain there entirely and gather together its whole being without needing to recall the past or encroach upon the future, where time is nothing to it, where the present lasts forever. This makes me think of what Jay was saying about the reanimation of time. Albeit imperceptibly and giving no sign of its passing, with no other feeling of deprivation or enjoyment, pleasure or pain, desire or fear than simply that of our existence, a feeling that completely fills the soul. As long as this state lasts, the person who is in it can call himself happy, not with an imperfect, pure, poor and relative happiness, such as one finds in the pleasures of life, but with a sufficient, perfect and full happiness, which leaves in the soul no void needing to be filled. So, the German philosopher, contemporary German philosopher Peter Sloterdijk, talks about how the drifting Rousseau discovers here a radically free region of the self, defined by its ecstatic unusability, its unemployability for any purpose. From the perspective of an instrumental world bent on exhausting the physical and creative resources of individuals in being useful, this region of the self is very dangerous, says Sloterdijk. The Rousseau of the Fifth Walk is like, he says, a nuclear reactor that suddenly radiates pure anarchic subjectivity into the environment. Useless, shiftless, good for nothing, the contemptuous words and phrases we use to denigrate the slacker attest to the secret fear he induces in us. No sooner does his anarchic subjectivity appear, whether in the form of romantic reverie, bohemian intoxication, hippie freakout, or punk nihilism, then it's attacked for its brazen parasitism, irresponsibility, and delinquency. So invested is our manically productive culture in the image of us as active and purposeful beings that we seek to erase or destroy all evidence to the contrary. The slacker must put on a suit, get a job, lose his benefits, and make himself useful. Harmlessly ineffective as he may be, we hate him and fear him for showing us the useless dimension of our own selfhood, for voicing our own impulse not to go to work, as a woman on the poster puts it, not to go to work today or tomorrow. Okay, I know that I'm limited in time. I just want to say a bit about an essay by Oscar Wilde, which I'm sure a lot of you will know. I can imagine that it's come up in the various contexts, the various educative formations of everyone in this room, but it's called The Soul of Man Under Socialism, and he wrote it in 1891 after reading Kropotkin, but one can see really the influence of an entire soup of anarchist and socialist ideas in its formation. It provokes us into examining our assumptions about what matters most in life. We tend to assume unthinkingly that our primary concern in life should be with what is useful to us, and that beauty is mere embellishment or indulgence. Where the useful serves our deepest needs, the beautiful merely caters to our desires and whims. Wilde asks us to imagine, on the contrary, a self and a society governed instead by the primacy of beauty, where the soul-crushing burden of useful labour is outsourced to commonly owned machines. Beauty in such a world consists in a personal thing being what it is and manifesting its singular personality. Under socialism, the human personality will not always, he says, be meddling with others or asking them to be like itself. It will love them because they will be different. The value of a person in such a society would consist not in how much she's like everyone else, but how much like herself. Socialism, as well conceives it, will foster the conditions under which singular individuals live side by side, idiorhythmically, without resentment or rivalry. The angry dissident spirit is an effect of a society which will not let its members become who they are. The note of the perfect personality, says Wilde, is not rebellion, but peace. Well, yeah, chance would be a fine thing. Far from being the enemy of society, in this vision, ataraxia, the Greek term for indifference, becomes its very basis. A faculty of indifference, a slothful disinclination to dictate to others how they should be, helps us cultivate, says Wilde, creative boldness, a fearless and joyful self-expression, which is Wilde's very definition of beauty. In abolishing the tyranny of the useful and the relentless repetition of labour, we clear the way for the reign of useless beauty over our daily lives. And the idea of the relentless repetition of labour comes from Hannah Arendt. Well, things haven't, in case you hadn't noticed, turned out entirely as Wilde had hoped, at least not yet. In this age of strivers and skivers, the popular fantasy is of a parallel society of welfare cheats and layabouts enjoying easy lives at the expense of our hard ones. The tyranny of the useful seems as entrenched as it's ever been. A unique personality is more a marketing tool than an expression of beauty. Be what you are sounds more like an advertising slogan than a spur to social and individual transformation. Wilde's socialist society was an aesthetic one, meaning that art alone, in his view, could express the unconstrained uniqueness of the human person. In our neoliberal society, art has become a means of buying and selling human uniqueness as a commodity like any other. Where Wilde anticipated a world of proliferating slackers doing whatever they wanted, our world is one in which would-be slackers are under compulsion to go wherever the job centre tells them. Under such conditions, making a claim for art as authentic and spontaneous self-expression seems naive. The majority of artists are stuck between the rock of financial sacrifice for the sake of creative time and the hard place of sacrificing creative time to financial necessity. A minority can make a living from their art, while a tiny fraction of that minority are made wealthy by the inflation of their prices to obscene levels, fueled by the status of art as the ultimate speculative commodity, frequently yielding profits that dwarf those of other sectors. Far from contesting the tyranny of the useful, art today has become its great ally, put to the task of enhancing brands, adorning corporate boardrooms and boosting investment portfolios. How then is an artist meant to defy such uses of her work? The German artist Maria Eichhorn offered a memorable answer to this question in her 2016 show at London's Chisenhale Gallery, 5 weeks, 25 days, 175 hours. The show opened with a one-day symposium featuring lectures and discussions of the ideas and questions it raised. The following day, a sign was placed outside the gallery entrance. For the duration of Maria Eichhorn's exhibition, 5 weeks, 25 days, 175 hours, Chisenhale Gallery staff are not working. The gallery and staff are closed from April 24th to 29th of May 2016. Eichhorn's exhibition put the gallery's entire staff on 5 weeks fully paid leave, during which no phone calls were taken and all emails were deleted. Staff were requested to do no work relating to their roles at the gallery throughout the duration of the show or no show. Now, Eichhorn wasn't the first artist to have made art out of a refusal to display anything. In his 1969 exhibition in Amsterdam, Robert Barry's consisted of a sign on the gallery's locked door reading, "During the exhibition the gallery will be closed," while in his LA show of 1974, Michael Asher removed the partition wall between the gallery's empty exhibition space and its office, exposing its everyday operations to the public. But the emphasis of Eichhorn's show was markedly different. The previous two artists placed the focus on the viewer's desire, thwarted by Barry and gratified by Asher, to see the very spaces blocked off to him. Eichhorn, in contrast, drew our attention to the gallery being closed because the staff were not working. In so doing, she channels Wilde's utopian spirit. The symposium prior to the gallery closure spent a good portion of its time detailing the huge volume of administrative labour and fundraising activity that goes into the gallery's survival. Eichhorn's gesture orchestrated a break into this painful labour of survival, using the funds raised for the show to release its staff from work. The gift of their freedom and the implicit plea for the value of not working became the invisible content of the show. For those 5 weeks, she realised in practice what Wilde envisioned in theory. The human being, liberated from the everyday tyranny of labour, could be experienced as what he is rather than what he does or has. We can imagine how the staff might have used or wasted their freed up time, but we cannot see it or make an image of it to display or sell. The staff, in other words, were released from the bonds of action and into the freedom of being. We don't get to see what the staff did with their spare time, A display of images of the staff sleeping, strolling in the park, watching daytime TV, or falling into massive existential self-doubt would extract a product from their freedom and so compromise it. On the term set by Wilde, it's a work of art precisely because there is nothing to see, because it isn't a thing to put in a gallery for others to visit. It suspends art as we know it, a discrete commodity to be circulated and looked at, in order to get us to imagine life itself as art. That is, life no longer in thrall to the labour of survival. For Wilde, life and art could only be worthy of themselves when released from instrumental bonds, when they became ends in themselves rather than the means to something else, like money or fame. This is impossible as long as art consists of objects made to buy and sell. Eichhorn is the latest in a long chain of modern artists who have asked how it's possible, if at all, to produce a work of art that wouldn't immediately be commodified. In 1961, the Italian artist Piero Mun Sony produced a series of cans containing, so he claimed, his own shit. The claim can only be verified by opening the tin, thereby destroying its market value. The last auction of one of the Mun Sony cans in 2016 fetched around £250,000. Mun Sony showed the alchemy whereby the art market turned waste into gold. Eichhorn's alchemy is different, taking funding that would ordinarily be put to work in the forms of curation, publicity, security, administration and public education, and transforming it into an unexpected and abundant gift of free time. Those 5 weeks, 25 days and 175 hours are taken out of the circuit of productivity and purpose. From the perspective of work and profit, they are wasted. But this wasted time is alchemized by the work into the immaterial gold of non-work, giving us a glimpse of the world as it might look if left to the slackers.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming. So I don't really know how I can follow those two papers, but I'm going to try. And the title for this, you'll understand why once you've seen a few of the slides. I'm calling it Beheading the Zombie, or How to Stay Alive in Neoliberalism While Mentally Ill. Now, my qualifications for talking to you about this is that I've been a service user in various boroughs of London for, Lucy said a decade, it's actually been 2.5 decades, so far longer. And I feel every year of it. So I wanted to give a kind of personal and also somewhat academic overview of how it has felt to me and how possibly it feels to others to be living in this bizarre time, the era of the non-death of neoliberalism. We've heard a lot about the zombie economy. Jonna, who's on the other panel, did a conference here, which is fantastic, about how we move on from that, how we re-establish an economic model which is not based on the one we've got, which has already failed. And we're not there yet. Some books here that you might want to read. The Strange Non-Death of Neoliberalism is a fantastic book. Another one, The Zombie Ideology, not ideology, sorry. Sounds like lobotomy, which is appropriate, named Tina. There is no alternative, which is the acronym. I believe it began with Thatcher, am I right? But Thatcher was the one who said there is no alternative. And she meant that on many levels. I think she meant it that there's no alternative to market neoliberalism. Also, there's no alternative but for you to submit to being a part of this. You know, and Thatcher's ideology was, you will submit, you will in the end become one of us. We also have Theresa May, the zombie prime minister, as she was called in a recent Guardian article, who just like the legacy of Thatcher, who she's a kind of weird pound shop Thatcher in a way. I see her as a version without the, you know, whatever you can say about Thatcher. Thatcher had presence, Thatcher had something, Thatcher had a vision, a ghastly vision, but she had something. Theresa May seems to be empty of anything other than the desire to keep her own party in power. And therefore she as a person is a kind of analogy, I think, to the era that we're living in. Nothing is happening, and yet everything is happening. Everything is being stopped. You know, Brexit is happening, and yet it's not happening. You know? The balance of power is held by the DUP. Do you ever hear about them? Who are these people? Who holds the balance of power in this country? And why is Theresa May still in power? Why is it the Tories have a lead in the polls at this point where economically things are falling to pieces? So you could be... I often wonder, and this is part of the reason that I think we all feel that we're going mad, you know, when you look at the political situation, it's really, really, really hard to see what is actually happening and if anything is going to move. So, thinking about living death, This is something that you hear a lot of depressed people say. It's something I have felt while depressed. You feel like a walking corpse. I felt so many people come to me saying, yeah, I just feel like the living dead. I feel like I'm moving, but I'm not really here. I feel like I've already died. This is a very, very common affect of depression. I don't know. It's very hard to say because we don't have many studies of people who were depressed in the 50s or the 1900s. I suspect that the feeling of internal death is something that is not didn't happen in the 1970s onwards, did it? We've all experienced, those of us who've experienced depression, experienced a sense of the self somehow dying and yet carrying on living. This is something that I have found the hardest thing to deal with. And when it is echoed by the political climate in which you live, and you start to see parallels, this could provide hope in a sense, but also, to a certain extent, when you're depressed, the environment echoes your own sense of living death, and this can happen at work. It can happen if you're oppressed through the benefits regime, as Joe has been talking about. Now, Jay has already mentioned the unprecedented levels of suicide among UK disability claimants. These are the people who are having distinct pressure put on them at the bottom not to be ill, not to be mentally ill. Suicide is... I said in my last talk that suicide had been rising in the UK since 2012. It actually hasn't. It's gone flat. Now, anybody that can give me a reason for that would be very interesting. It's rising sharply in the USA. USA death rates, particularly opioid-related deaths, have absolutely spiraled in the last 10 to 20 years, particularly in the states that voted for Trump. And there's a very interesting article in The Guardian I can direct you to, which calls the Trump voting states the death states, because they are the states in which not only are suicides going up, opioid deaths, but also the people that used to go on living for longer have started to die younger. So as if that extension of life, which was provided by the post-war consensus, you know, the healthcare, better nutrition, better standards of living for everybody, is starting to go backwards. And these are the people who are turning to the right and not the left. And this is something that we have to bear in mind. That populist authoritarianism, much as we may hate it, is often a result of, I think, you know, mental suffering, denied or not. So changing things quickly. While I was doing one of my binges on zombie films, because I'm doing zombie culture at the moment, I came across the film Brain Dead, which was Peter Jackson, the Lord of the Rings director. It's his first film. And good grief, if you've not seen it, I don't know whether to recommend it to you or not. It's a gore fest, and yet I found myself thinking about capitalism, as I always do. So in this scene, this is the hero, and these are his collection of zombies, which what he does is, instead of beheading them, he keeps them in his basement and feeds them tranquilizers in an attempt to keep them calm. Eventually, at the denouement, he accidentally feeds them a stimulant, and they all sort of burst out, and then the bloodbath continues. But I found this scene is almost touching. He's got his zombie family here, he's tranquilizing them, one of his is his mother. And it made me think of how we have been forced, instead of sort of beheading the zombie of capitalism, we have tamed it, we have sat with it, we're having lunch with it, you know? We keep it in our basement and we are sitting on it because we don't know what else to do. Yeah. So, this I find a much more creative invocation of the zombie banker. These come from some marches, and I believe this is one of the Occupy members. And this reverses the zombie from being a member of, you know, the Consumer Society, one of us, sort of, you know, the hordes, to the people that actually did this to us. So the banker here has his sack of toxic acids, and this one is sort of, you know, choking himself on our money. And also what happened in Occupy was that a series of dancers would dress up as zombies with plaques on saying things like, feed me your assets, feed me your student loans, and perform the Thriller dance, which I thought was fantastic. But it's a way of showing that, in fact, that what is predating on us, the living death comes from above, it isn't just located in us. Now, I wanted to take you, after this, on a tour of what felt like living death to me in January 2018. This photograph, I live in Streatham, and this alluring photograph of Streatham High Road here was taken on what I later found out was Blue Monday, 15th of January 2018. That was the day when Carillion collapsed. That was a major government construction supplier, so that was announced amid estimates that 250,000 jobs were going to go. And so to celebrate Blue Monday, I took this picture. There was this dark downpour occupying most of the daylight hours. And you can't see here, but the Barclays Bank fascia had been damaged, and it was sheeting down water on passers-by and people trying to get in the bank, which I thought was a really good metaphor for the aftermath of the global financial crisis. You know, try and get in the bank, you'll be soaked to death, and no one's going to towel you down. You know. Then as I walked along, I saw this just made me sad and laugh at the same time. Thieves operate in this area. It's a banner that's been placed bizarrely on Streatham High Road. And what also has happened in recent years is that this police, this lovely shiny police, front desk, which replaced the police station that used to exist in Streatham, has been shut down. You can't read the sign there, but it says, "Dear members of the public, Streatham front office is now officially closed to the public. If you require assistance, please call 101 or 999 in emergency." So, to me, this day summed up a lot of the effects of austerity. You know, you're told to look after yourself. Look after yourself, thieves operate, you're on your own because there's no police. You know, we can't afford that. And what I then began to think about was the idea of personal responsibility for your own illness. You're constantly told, you're responsible for getting over this. As you're responsible for everything, you're responsible for looking after your belongings, but no one's going to help look after you. You're also meant to look after your own mental health. I'm not knocking that. I think we all do have to practice radical self-care, as Jay has said. But what I find very interesting, and after 25 years of treatment, is how the political has somehow remained impersonal in mental health treatment, except for this sense of responsibility. So I've been reading a lot recently about how psychoanalysts and therapists, for instance, can deal with the political, the fact that people are affected by the political, that people have become depressed since Trump got in, since Brexit was announced, since they started losing their jobs, and since the NHS basically shut down. And I found a fascinating line in this book from 2006. The effects of an increasingly polarised, insecure and threatening world mean that an ideologically enforced split between the political order and personal life is becoming difficult to sustain. I thought, difficult to sustain? How can it ever have been sustained? But I believe in a lot of treatments it has been, because the therapist will often attempts to treat you as a sort of entity, a malfunctioning entity on your own. So, for instance, she'll go in there and you'll say, "How are you feeling?" And if you started to say, I'm really depressed because higher education is becoming an incredibly difficult and area to work in, and I'm worried about the rise of fascism. The therapist might well say, "Okay, but last week we were talking about your mum, so let's go back to that." Do you know what I mean? Because that is the model of therapy. It's treat the person, treat the family. Psychoanalysis is supposed to be based on childhood factors, which of course are absolutely important, but the interplay of those in politics, absolutely, particularly now, has to be taken into account. And I think that some psychoanalysts are finding it difficult to do that. Now, the other way that we're supposed to treat ourselves is increasingly online. This made me laugh probably more than the movie Brain Dead, and also horrified me more than the movie Brain Dead. This is the MSN loneliness campaign, which has come online alongside the appointment of a new loneliness minister, Sarah Crouch. MSN now has pages and pages of various little stories about loneliness. You can test yourself for loneliness. You may not know that you're lonely. Serious? I'm really being serious. You can test yourself and you will get a score out of 10 that tells you whether you are lonely and whether you need to do something about this. And apparently you can be lonely whether or not you spend time with people in the day and have a partner. So, you don't know. And a lot of it is based on the cost of loneliness. I find it very strange. I think the reason that this minister was appointed is probably a sort of, mental health washing. It's like, there's a lot of talk about distress and mental health. I think we better be seen to be doing something about this. And what they've done is base it on loneliness. Fascinating. Self-testing is a big part of it, and there's an awful lot of the quantification of the economic impact of loneliness, a lot like the way that the obesity so-called epidemic is being treated. It's treated as something that you have to solve, but also this is big enough now for the government to care about because it's costing us money. There's a lot of suggested self-care, a lot of branding, corporate-led campaigns, MSN, presumably getting involved because technology and excessive use of technology have been fingered as one of the main causes of loneliness because they prevent people from interacting face-to-face. So MSN are coming and saying, no, we're not for loneliness. We want to help people get together. There is a £20 million fund for positive solutions to the loneliness epidemic, and apparently things like, and again, I'm not knocking this, I'm sure it probably works for some people, but things like men in Yorkshire having meetings in sheds about gardening was one of the things that got funding. I'm not saying men in Yorkshire don't need help, but I don't think these localised solutions are really going to help with the epidemic that we're currently facing. Like befriending schemes for the elderly, things like that. Absolutely nothing that you would be against, but nothing that is going to solve the underlying problem. What I found interesting about this is the way that the loneliness epidemic, as well as the depression epidemic, are given this language of an externally located sweeping virus. So it obscures the fact that loneliness is integral to consumer capitalism and neoliberalism, as is obesity, I think. And I also feel that the fact that this ministry is a deflection of attention away from the global mental health crisis. And I hate the term virtue signalling, but I think in this case you can really see it. Virtue signalling is a term often used against the left by the right. But in this case, it's a classic case to me of right-wing virtue signalling, saying, well, OK, we've seen that there's an issue. Here's 20 million. Go and get together in your sheds and don't say that we don't care about mental health, despite the fact that we've cut every other surface that people rely on. We've also had in recent months something that came very forcibly into my consciousness, is this weird mystification of success and the idea that suicide, if people succumb to it, is a sort of inexplicable personal tragedy. Kate Spade, the designer who killed herself, I believe, a couple of months ago, and there was absolute consternation about how a woman who looked pretty and could make pretty handbags had killed herself. I was like, how could this be the case? She was rich, she was successful. A total lack of understanding of, for instance, the symptomatology of things like bipolar. I know that diagnoses are not necessarily the most helpful thing, but the idea that someone depressed should never appear happy or smile or do anything productive is astonishing to me. And yet, this is embedded really in the common sense understanding of mental health, that somebody who looks happy will not die, and if they do, oh my God, what can possibly have happened? Ivanka Trump got involved and said, Kate Spade's tragic passing is a painful reminder that we never truly know another's pain or the burden they carry. If you're struggling with depression and contemplating suicide, please seek help. This is replied to by a number of tweets saying, well, it's a bit hard to do that, seeing as your father has just cut every lifeline except voluntary phone lines like the Lifeline. And this made me think of the cul-de-sac that's involved in the concept of suicide prevention. There's an awful lot of stuff out there about suicide prevention. That's what seems to attract funding as well. So it's as if, the point at which people reach emergency, which is often too late because people have at that point already broken down. That is the point in which services which have been cut to the bone kick in. Understandably, it's the only point in which services can kick in because they don't have the space or time to treat people before they reach a point of absolute breakdown. Suicide prevention is not going to help because once you've prevented suicide, you still have the person who tried to commit suicide in front of you and you still have that person to deal with. And that's what I'm seeing completely lacking. Crisis is crisis and will happen when it does, but the idea that we can deal with the crisis and then simply send the person away, which is what's happening repeatedly in mental health services and has happened to me, is quite dehumanising. And Hannah Jane Parkinson, who writes in The Guardian, just wrote, I really recommend you read this. It was 30th of June, so just a few days back. She wrote the most brutal article on her own treatment by the NHS and talking about a lot of the things I've just mentioned, that this conversation about mental health dominated by positivity and the memification of a battle won. She says it's infuriating to come home from a secure hospital suicidal to a bunch of celebrity awareness raising selfies and thousands of people saying that all you need to do is ask for help when you've been asking for help and not getting it. And that's certainly been my experience as well. So we get emergency treatment only, like what happened to Hannah is that she received emergency treatment. She got sections, she had a 22-hour wait to be seen, the hospitalisation out of borough, which happens increasingly because your own borough is full. Upon leaving the inpatient ward, there was a 2-week stay at a crisis house, which helped, and then that was it. I was ill enough to be sectioned, but well enough to have therapy discontinued. This happens constantly. I was put on an 18-month waiting list for therapy. I called iCope, an NHS digital therapy service, but because I was on a waiting list, I was ineligible. And that is the level that a seriously suicidal person, that's the level of treatment you get, and we've all been through it, those of us who regularly use services. This is something from, and sorry to introduce a dark tone, I wrote a blog, I was asked to write a blog about the experience of being a depressed academic. I sent it to the blog owner and she didn't publish it, I think because it was too depressing. So I'm going to just read you a little bit of it, just to give you an idea of, for those who haven't been depressed, I know it must be very hard to see over that barrier. For those who have, I've kind of made it a political point myself to just say, right, well, this is the way I live, this is how I feel, and I have been there. You know what I mean? It's probably going to damage my career to do this. It makes me look unreliable. I'm an out mentally ill person, but I have decided that at this point I have to make that leap and say, this is what's happening to me, and this is how I feel quite regularly. So there's a description of what happens to me when I have a depressive episode. The descent into something beyond mere unhappiness tends to be very visual. The colour leaches out of things. It becomes harder to detect, but it isn't dark. There's often a sort of vicious brightness to what I can see, or this crackly electricity, like scenes from a Japanese horror film. The Ring comes to mind a lot. I don't know if you've seen that. The day splits into jagged sections and certain fragments race to consciousness with this brutal clarity. It's like a nightmare where you can see exactly what terrible thing is happening, but you can't stop it. And at other times you get mired in this dreadful fatigue, this sort of hopelessness in which any aspiration for better seems not only silly, but a logical impossibility, a black joke. Like an abusive partner or parent, the depressed brain repeatedly tells you incontrovertible truths which are actually lies. It will tell you have no redeeming features, you've always been a failure. If anything good ever happened to you, it's over now. And obediently, your memory will provide no pleasure in recalling any of these good memories, but only painful images of what seems absolutely lost. Oh, look, glad someone likes it, because the blog editor definitely didn't. So that to me is what I felt. And these are some images that came to me. This is an image from The Ring. I'm a bit of a horror fan, and to me this kind of, this ghastly brightness is, people often talk about depression being dark, but in this scene, this woman's being led past a television which she's terrified of, and there's a crackling electricity sort of coming towards her, and she hides, and then eventually she's sort of drawn to look at the ghastly video. If you've seen The Ring, you know what I mean. I won't give it away. This, to me, is fascinating. I've seen this film, Shutter, used as a metaphor for depression before. You've seen it, yeah, great. It's a Thai film. Unfortunately, I've kind of given away a bit of it here for those who haven't seen it. Because this man is going through the whole film, he feels a weight on him, he's like this, he's sort of bowed down. And eventually, when a photograph is taken, it's seen that this ghost is literally sitting on him. There's been a sort of ghost sitting on him since the point of death. And that, to me, is also something that... the physicality of depression is something that is not often mentioned. The feeling of literally the weight of another body on top of you, that you get out of bed and you feel. And when I saw that, I thought, God, what a metaphor. So... Now, thinking about the zombie existence, and my horror film viewing will give you some ideas of what happens to me sometimes. Mark Fisher, the wonderful Mark Fisher, came up with the idea of depressive hedonia, and I think this is very important, something I'm not seeing, again, reflected much in mental health treatment and discourse, except in those who quote Fisher. Because more and more I talk to my students and say, oh, yeah, I had a 6-hour Netflix binge last night, couldn't turn it off. It's that weird state in which you're doing something you enjoy, but you can't stop it and you can't move on to something else. It sometimes gets diagnosed as ADHD, but I think that's, again, it's a simplification, a solidification of this thing that's happening to a lot of people, which is that attention is drawn into something. You go into this dissociated state where you're just either reading and reading or watching and watching, and you just zone out, and at the end of it, you feel terrible. And I know that my students, even those who don't suffer from actual depression, go through this all the time, and they will say things like, oh, God, this is why I'm so tired today, I just couldn't stop watching something. Now, that to me says that the attention economy is a big part of this, the fact that your attention is being grabbed all the time, and that while you have very readily available entertainment and consumables, we can all go and, if you've got the money, you can go and get something nice to eat, you can switch on Netflix. It's as if, as the horizon of achievement have receded, we've become sort of mired in that, well, what do we do to enjoy ourselves tonight? Right, Something else I don't really have time to go into, I wanted to mention negative narcissism as well, but that's perhaps something, that... I've just read a fascinating article saying that depressive people tend to say I all the time. It's I feel this, I feel that. And for that reason, that can be seen as selfish. And I think that's possibly the case. There is a selfishness of depression, but it's the selfishness of intense suffering in which you have collapsed in on yourself. The self collapses inwards, and you can't then communicate with other people. You can only communicate about yourself. So this quote from Sylvia Plath, I think it sums it up for me. It says, the tongue got stuck in my jaw, it's stuck in a barbed wire snare. Ich. I could hardly speak. And that's from her poem Daddy, which if you haven't read, I really suggest that you do. And the authors of The Inner Level have looked at this narcissism and said that they feel that defensive narcissism on the part of people who would never see themselves as mentally ill is a very strong reaction to life in rising inequality, to identify yourself with the people at the top, as you see in authoritarian populism. Poor people vote for Trump. They vote for him because they think he's a successful businessman. You know what I mean? And I've heard that repeatedly. Well, Trump's a businessman. He knows how to run a country. And an aspiration to be as successful and rich as the people at the top who you're constantly seeing. And this is a big problem for the left, because what is the left offering? The left appears to be offering, reduced expectations, doesn't it? The left appears to be saying, well, we don't want anyone to be rich. And that's why they're often accused of the politics of envy. And this is something we really, really have to deal with. In a consumer society, people are going to aspire to be at the top of that. And the criminologist Steve Hall talks a lot about this, if you want to read about populism and how very, very, very difficult it's going to be for the left to conquer that. You should probably read some stuff by him. New Age beliefs feed into this. This is a tweet from Mark Fisher's Haunt, the Twitter account. I don't know who writes that. Who writes Mark Fisher's Haunt? Is there someone here? I'm sure it is. I'm sure it's someone at Goldsmiths. Yeah, I'm being tapped. But anyway, magical voluntarism being this idea that you can create your own life, the secret. It's like if you believe in it enough, you will get it. I think this is the flip side of depression, as it says here, whose underlying belief is that we're all uniquely responsible for our own misery and so deserve it. Okay, so... Right, I'm going to leave you with this. Now, if anyone's feeling depressed, just remember who you're up against. This is the face of defensive narcissism, right? I am a very stable genius. Throughout my life, my two greatest assets have been mental stability and being, like, really smart. I went from very successful businessman to top TV star to president of the United States on my first try. I think that would qualify as not smart, but genius, and a very stable genius at that. So I think I'll leave you with that. If you're depressed... A, that's part of the reason why. B, why isn't he? Have a think about that. You're not Donald Trump. Why are you depressed? So think about negative narcissism and think about this kind of narcissism, and perhaps the type you've got is something that is more beneficial to the collective than this. All right? So thank you so much.
Thank you so much to all three speakers. That was really, really enlightening. I'm hoping we've got some questions in the audience. Okay, we've got one over there. We'll warm us up, and then we might get some more. The man in the chair. In the glasses.
Thank you very much. That was amazing. And I really like the way that you use humour in your presentations as well.
I think you have to laugh. Avoid death.
I work as a writer and a community activist, and one of the things that I've noticed, I'm not sure when it started to happen, was that the introduction of a social care competitive marketplace, talking about economics, has placed many people now in a position of being commodities that are bought and sold within contracts. And this has had very profound effects on the way we think about human helping. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on that, and whether many of our establishments and organisations actually set up to help human beings and create wellness are now in actual fact creating the very opposite.
I think you're absolutely right. I can't blame the people working in them. Hannah Jane Parkinson, in that piece I quoted, said that although she loves the NHS, she also hates it because of what she's having to go through in it. And I totally get that, having had 25 years of being asked the same questions, doing the same tests, going from person to person to person who is just processing me and wants me to recover and get off their books as quickly as possible. It is not the fault of the individuals. They are suffering too. And I think I saw that very forcibly when my psychiatrist went to New Zealand because he couldn't stand the UK and just left. But yes, dehumanisation through, I believe, the recovery imperative, which you write about, Jay, don't you? I think is a big, big issue. I'd probably hand it to Jay because she actually works in these services to maybe say a bit more about that. Because you know what it's like having to...
Yeah, I mean, what can you say? I think it's difficult because people who are stuck as kind of passive agents in, be it the NHS or other organisation, and have internalised the wellness idea and often burn out because of some knowledge that doesn't actually fit with the values that brought people in. It's how to galvanise those people, how to acknowledge that, whilst also recognising that that is a hell of a lot more power socially still than, psychiatric patients, certainly psychiatric survivors. Again, everyone's being sympathetic to people who are working in the DWP. Well, actually, I find that quite problematic. So how can we keep our thinking brain open about what's going on for people who are agents of the self and how those might suffer, and how those might use the discourse of wellness or recovery to understand that, whilst also not absolving a responsibility? Because we are linchpins, but we have to find ways to organise, which is what we're here today to do.
Thanks. Yeah. I think I and my colleagues will probably say that their consulting rooms are increasingly full of people who are working in the sector that you're talking about, who turn to psychotherapy in a way just to have an experience of a different kind of horizon of care that has the privilege of open-endedness and of, exactly the opposite of this aim-directed, off-the-books spirit of relating to another person. So it offers another model of care. Of course, then that raises the questions about the costs of individual psychotherapy and the possibilities really for extending the franchise of individual psychotherapy. But I think that the real tragedy of this is that people who went into the sector of social care in order really to fulfill a notion of universal care find themselves instead kind of caught in a logic of complete instrumentalization of human beings. And so I tend to think that one of the ways in which psychoanalysis can understand itself politically is precisely in terms of a different logic of care.
Thanks for that. Do we have any more questions? Okay, one at the back there.
Cheers. In an age where independence is preferable, as you were saying, and earlier we were talking about individualisation and responsibilisation in today's economy. So in an age where sort of individuality is really the thing, where are these spaces of community? From my own experience, I would say, and talking to other people who have finished uni and finished undergrad or postgrad, you go to a new city and it's okay, well, how do I meet these new people? I'm no longer surrounded by lots of uni mates or schoolmates or whatever. And are the answers in sort of kind of grassroots things, or is it very much from a top-down, we need to provide a more structural solution? Does that make sense? So basically, where is the community, and where's the answer?
I've got a kind of similar question, which I might actually need to answer both. I was thinking about the same thing in terms of agency and neoliberal agency, and it's we have so much agency, and that's the kind of big deal thing, but we also feel completely helpless. And in terms of you must have seen the precarity panel before, in terms of what resistance can we achieve or build, and this sort of testing children from 6 or the whole way through. The teachers don't like it, the children don't like it, the parents don't like it, although we all like it when we get a first or a gold star or whatever else. But where can this line between agency and actually our opinions or our views translate into action? And I was thinking in the school system, if that could ever be possible in our new economic future. So that's it, either
where is community? I think for me, I had this awful example when you were talking about schools, where I thought of, I can't remember his surname, Toby, what's his name, with the free schools or whatever it's called. Yeah, exactly, whereby, if you're middle class and white and you've got a good income, you can come up with these kind of things. For me, I've been looking quite a lot at the moment at the work of kind of Sue Holland, who's a kind of community action person from the 80s, and basically talks about a model of it's that balance of all the best progressive stuff, it's not imposed. And I think psychology and, dare I say it, psychoanalysis is quite an ambivalent thing right now when it comes from outside and insists. And I think it can actually get in the way of people gathering together. Talking can be radical, and actually as soon as it's associated, say, with the NHS, which has a state agency, has a state function, or something different happens. So I think we need to find ways of gathering together. Sue Holland's work is talking about, what happened with all the social justice movements 20 years earlier in the 60s and 70s. People gather together, they talk about how shit things are, they talk about, you know, how it's like to not be able to fucking move, and then there's some help shared in that, and then something moves as well in terms of targeting structural oppression. For me, I think where shrinks can be useful, perhaps, though, you know, certainly not immune to this too, is then when those kind of dynamics of envy and aggression and stuff, which I have a sadness because I've seen that personally splinter so many brilliant radical from the ground movements, to find a way then to keep the energy going when people start throwing out their shit, which we all do at one another. And I think if we can do that, then we're talking about something different.
Yeah, I'd agree very much with Jay on that, but I do also think it has to be top-down as well, because I think that when you have a government which is deliberately splintering services, cutting benefits, which is basically increasing, I think, the shame attached to not being functional by creating all these little campaigns that say that if you just do a 10-point test that you'll feel better and be able to be a part of society. Unless that changes, it will be very difficult to establish anything other than, as Jay said, continual sort of small movements against. And this is why, although I hate what he's done over Brexit, I seriously hope that Corbyn gets in next time, because I think that we don't really have a chance to start rebuilding unless there is a government in place which is committed to that and which understands the issues. And isn't just going to make a gimmick out of mental health or wellness in general. I've been part of several community groups, and I've had the exact experience that Jay's talked about. It's as if the various differences, that the various sort of pieces of the self that you bring to that group start to splinter. And I think also as well, if you are a mentally ill person, I work for many kind of, you know, associations like things like mental health media, and half the time there was no one there because we were all off sick with depression. You know, so it's like, what do you do when you're too sick to do anything?
Yeah.
And can I show one of my slides that I didn't get to show? This was I've got a friend who actually, this is a interesting sort of online community. It's a guy called David Dole who writes out of Germany, and he suffers from severe depression, suicidality, and he just writes about it in painful, brutal detail. He talks about how you can be a part of a collective movement as a depressed person, and he says, you know, depression, you know, we're not an upcoming revolutionary subject, but depression needs to be politicised, and we need to think about the solidarity that we can achieve through perhaps feeling crap. You know, if so many of us are feeling crap and there are reasons that we can identify, then this is something that we can organise around at some point. And I think that is beginning to start with events like this and the event we had in January. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's a important paradox, I think, in the generation of community identity around feeling crap, because what it does actually is it puts in question a model of community as immediately oriented around a specific aim and a specific program. I think one of the ways in which the depressed person starts to feel inadequate in relation to any kind of community formation is when something specific is required of them, rather than just their presence and their willingness to speak and their willingness to open themselves to the community. When it starts to be, well, what can you do for us? What can you give us? And so it's that kind of informing of the community by a spirit of, you know, the non-demand, I think.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
Thanks to all three speakers for brilliant talks. I wanted to throw in another rather depressing topic, which I suppose is going on outside today, which is the weather and climate change. And I just wonder, and the answer may be not very much, but I just, it must be shaping our worlds individually and collectively, that somewhere, it may not face it very kind of empirically or factually, but we sort of are told that we are living at the end of the world in some sense. You hear this talk of there only being another 60-something harvests, and this sense of, I mean, I have young children, and I almost kind of assume that they won't have children. It's a weird sort of, I have this kind of strange sense that this is kind of, you know, somehow that will be the kind of end of the line in some strange sense. It's not a rational or a sort of empirical thought, but it's sort of a sense that the sort of, you know, the 2 degrees is already kind of built in.
Yeah.
The sort of 4 degrees could, all these sorts of things. And I just wonder how much does this kind of come into any of your particular work or your consulting or patient work or just thinking about the things that have been talked about. And if the answer's not very much, then that's fine. But I sort of think that in a way, we're talking about after neoliberalism, there is of course something which is sort of far bigger than neoliberalism as well.
A dystopia, yeah. We think we're living in it, but it could be a lot worse. Anyone seen The Road? That horror film, The Road? Yeah. So you might have children, but yeah, you could be leading them through a dystopia with a shopping cart. Yeah, that's... yeah. Did anyone want to start before me? And I've got stuff to say, but...
Go ahead.
Yes, it absolutely does. Well, I think for most people on the left, you get depressed. Climate change is probably one of the things that comes up, isn't it? Because precisely that sense of guilt that you have participated in a culture which has, probably meant that my kids, who in fact are sitting up there, may not be able to have children or may have a limited horizon to face based on the fact that we, America, China, us, have guzzled most of the resources the planet had to offer. Yes, I think it absolutely is depressing, and I think, again, it's that line that we keep coming back to. It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. We can't seem to stop the processes that are feeding global warming, can we? Because China, the Chinese economy, another power station in China will wipe out any savings that we make by turning off lights. So there's that sense of hopelessness involved in it, the fact that something much bigger than us, a horizon much bigger than us, is coming towards us. I don't think there's any way that you can really analyse it except to say that we must do, it comes down to, you end up coming up to this awful personal responsibility thing, that there is nothing we can do except turn our own lights off and go vegan or...
Yeah, one of the most important terms for me in the psychoanalytic lexicon is the idea of helplessness, that the human being is born into a condition of helplessness, which marks and conditions them through the course of their lives. Now, in a kind of more boosterish, optimistic era, where you counter human helplessness by moving into a mode of radical sort of self-expansion and group expansion, and see yourself as involved in a project of building a world that will outlast you, but that you can exert some kind of mastery over, and some kind of creative, achievements in. What happens when incrementally and then not so incrementally that horizon of a kind of erotic expansion of the world just gets wiped away? And what people are so where helplessness might be a sort of buried dimension of the human being, say, of the Industrial Revolution, a certain kind of subjectivity of the Industrial Revolution, say, or other periods of technological industrial optimism. In a period of where our horizon is defined by a sense of a looming apocalypse, we're actually much, much closer texturally to a state of helplessness. And I think that says so much about the way in which, all the malaise that we're discussing manifest themselves. But I think, the way that Ruth's brought in a certain kind of cultural discourse definitely relates to this sort of nearness, this increasing nearness to a state of helplessness.
I mean, just to echo what everyone said, it does absolutely come up as something to do. I mean, just really what we were just hearing from Josh, the kind of the dissolution, the destruction, the dissolving, the ending, but not in a kind of big bang way, in a reduction and draining, just as the eye can drain. And I think there's something quite interesting there in terms of You know, I mean, it's not quite the death drive, but that destructiveness that exists in the soul and that we would wish away writ large in what we do with the world and what we experience in the world. And it's both a horror of that, the individual death, the global death, and I think it's incredibly important to take that as something that isn't, oh, that's an individual pathology, but that's a very real echoing of a deep hopelessness, inevitable nothingness that exists. She says positively.
At least we can enjoy the sunshine.
Yeah, exactly.
Enjoy global warming while it lasts.
Has anyone got any other questions? Yes, at the back there, and then
Thank you. Yeah, my question is about like the contribution of like the people's physical experience to mental health. Because you were saying at the end of your presentation about the Netflix binge and how that could be a factor in terms of like attention economy, but could it also be a factor in terms of like the amount of time people spend engaging with screens? I mean, I know there's this kind of moral panic about like blue light and whatever, but also in terms of the amount of kind of sedentary activity and people obviously not spending so much time outdoors and so on, like what kind of effect is that having?
Do you want to?
Or do you want to? We'll take yours and then we can answer both, and that'll probably be the last.
Hi, my name is Matt. I'm from the Economy for the Common Good. Thank you for putting on this session because I didn't quite know what to expect from it, but it's really a bit of an eye-opener. What I want to ask is, capitalism has this really simple, easily understandable story or narrative. It tells us that it's all about the individual, it's being better is being good. Doing well means having stuff, and the more things you have, the more successful you are, and you will be measured and respected in society according to this. What are we going to replace it with? What is that thing that will drive us if we don't have this thing that we pursue in material terms anymore?
Any more? Is that it? Do you want to go, Josh?
Not really. In relation to the sort of the experience of the body and the colonization of the mind and body by these prosthetic devices that form so much of our kind of everyday identity. I'm a bit sort of increasingly wary of a certain clever discourse of moral panic that says there have always been moral panics, and 500 years ago there were moral panics about the printing press, and every technology brings its own attendant panic. I mean, that's true, but it's equally true that we can only experience a new technology from our own situated perspective. And I think the thing that really changes actually has to do with Will's question, which is that the thing that one could say is really unprecedented is the kind of empirically testable horizon of the end of the world. And that, I think that seeps in as a kind of low-level, imperceptible kind of blue light of everyday consciousness. And I think it has a kind of surreptitious, insidious relationship to the ways in which we surrender ourselves to these prosthetic devices, to our sense that, the kind of ordinary organic virtues of the outdoors, of fresh air, of a kind of unmediated relationship between ourselves and the air, that this is something that belongs to an impossible past, that there's something quaint about going for a walk now, or that it belongs to, that we can sort of only see it through the distorting lens of the kinds of wellness rhetorics. that have taken over our sense of bodily health. So, how do we reclaim a sense of bodily pleasure and of an unmediated relationship to the outside that isn't sort of naive or impossibly nostalgic, or that doesn't wish away these other much more sinister meanings of the outside?
Just something very briefly before me. For me, I thought Ruth was just speaking so brilliantly about the embodied experience and the absolute cruciality of that. There's a lot of literature that's been coming through on the inflamed body, and it's huge right now. It actually talks back in the 1940s and 30s. They used to say that madness starts in the gut, and that bit's coming back. Which is it could be very useful in terms of understanding embodiment, but the problem that we've got already is that then neoliberalism comes in, and you can take someone's blood and see their stress inflammation markers, and it's very easy, because this is what happens and happens again and again, to go, oh, we need to change people's blood, rather than recognising this idea of the bounded self is absolutely ridiculous, because our internal chemistry is a function of everything around us, including the environmentalism and neoliberalism and Trump and all of that. That is inside us. That lives inside us. So we have to be very
the injection is
exactly. So we have to be incredibly careful of that right now. And this idea, this fantasy of the bounded self, who we can help in that way. Just linking that very quickly with the nature. Well, what I heard is the nature question. The screen time thing, I do worry that, Thatcher, it's an interesting slip. The Tories use that the whole time as an explainer of why mental illness rates are going up. It is a factor, but it is also a real shield to the effects of other things in neoliberalism. Having said that, of course, if you are stuck with this, eye mirror that feeds you back things within your echo chamber that, as Ruth was saying so brilliantly, kind of gives a narcissistic anhedonia, that stops the learning, which often happens, in the clinic, whereby, often if someone has a therapy and often has an analysis, actually, nature often becomes the thing. And, it's seeing in nature and having that time in nature to witness seasonality, things growing, things dying, things failing to new things, big seeds taking long times to reap. Those kind of metaphors and that embodied experience is often really, really, really powerful. And I think for me that links with what we see as a good outcome. Well, actually a good outcome is not your working neoliberal subjects. Very, very often it's actually people deciding they don't want to work is shit, and actually, they want to garden and, go and spend time with goats. Because that links with that other question, well, what are we to live for? Which we have to have space and time to think about.
I think, I'd like to bring up as well what Josh said about slacking, because I think what he said about walking in the countryside, to me, as you said, this has now become quaint, but it's also become a form of time off, hasn't it? Rather than something that we do, you went walking. And in fact, we should be walking, we shouldn't be sitting. We shouldn't be sitting all day with a screen, in front of our eyes like this. The fact that we're being... But our cityscapes kind of force us into this sedentary lifestyle where you're sitting in a car, you get out, you sit down. You notice that I'm wearing this device. I'm supposed to do 10,000 steps. So I find that, in fact, the injunction to be well has left me with this neurotic need to make sure I do enough steps in the day. And I'm not sure that's helping me either. I'm not sure that exercise is helping me at all. I'd be far better off, if I could drive out to the countryside, which would take me 2 hours from, Streatham, and go for a walk amid some trees. I'm sure I'd feel a lot better, but instead I have, a device and I go, I've done 8,000, I'd better sort of jog on the spot for a bit. I'm not sure how...
I got one of those on my phone.
Yes,
I didn't ask. I didn't download it. It just came with a phone.
Yes, we're all quantifying ourselves, whether sort of voluntarily or not. And it again ties in with the climate change. The alienation from nature issue is massive. And one that apparently the Chinese, who are, the nation that we consider most alienated from nature, perhaps, we see this image of, massive factory zones. Apparently there's a big movement in China to get back to nature and go walking. you know. So that's an interesting thing. As capitalism advances in China, they're getting these kind of liberal movements that we have been living with for a long time to reunite people with the nature that's sort of being eaten up by capitalism. I think this is vitally important, and it should be probably a part of any community drive. And you do see it; they do exist, don't they? These meetings in parks and.
But it's a social prescription from your GP.
Yes.
Exactly.
So much better to have a community, psychological health. I mean, it's awful. We end up using wellness language even to describe something that would be helpful, really helpful. But.
So on that community vibe, it's now lunchtime. So before we thank our speakers for finding time, NSE will be eating lunch on the Green. If anyone else wants to, there's loads of shops on New Cross Road. I'm sure lots of you know, but if anyone doesn't, people with name tags can show you where you're going. But honestly, the conversation today is so vitally important. There's a cafe open in the building where the other talks are on, per Professor Stuart Hall. There's a cafe there if you don't want to leave campus, so you can get some food there. But honestly, these conversations are so vitally important for a day like today, mobilising new economic futures. How can you do it without accessing, the topics that we've discussed today? So can we have a round warm of applause for Jay, Josh, and Liz?